It will not. It will overflow and go where you are not intending it to go. So the first thing you have to think about when you're starting to do fountains is, where is your water flow going to go? So this happens to be my first fountain. I actually got away with it on my first try. I was amazed. The first fountain I made these elements, and I stuck the elements to the trunk, if you will, if you want to think of it as a tree. You need a vessel at the bottom to collect the water. The pumps that you use for fountains are submersible pumps. So there has to be enough water to submerge the pump. So you got to have a vessel that's deep enough. If you have a vessel that's only that deep, the pump's not submerged, it will not work. So you've got to make sure that everything falls into the vessel. If it overflows anywhere, now you've got a pump that's pumping water out onto your table, and if it's pumping water on the table, now you don't have a vessel of water anymore, you've got a dry vessel, and your pump burns out. Because pumps don't like running without water. They all talk about, do not run dry. And they're serious about that. If you run it dry, it will die. Quickly, actually. How do I know this? Don't ask. So, this being my first one, I thought, wow, how cool would it be to have this wiggle-waggle trunk? Well, how do you get the water from the bottom vessel up to the top? Well, that's a hose. How do you get a hose from the bottom to the top? You run it through the hollow form. How do you get it through a hollow form that goes like this?
With difficulty.
With great difficulty. Oh my gosh. You'll notice that this one barely dribbles. That's because the hose is kinked somewhere. And one of these days, I'm going to pull that hose out and get it right. It's been 3 years or so. I'm not doing it. So that, because that's really hard. It's very hard. Ceramics being stone and all, they don't bend. Yeah, it's not, no. And then, of course, you got this whole thing and you got it upside down, you're trying to pull this thing through. Now I'm going to break it. So, that's one thing that you want to think about when you're dealing with fountains. Another thing is water flow. So again, this being my first one, I thought, wow, how cool would it be to get it to pool and then flow, and then pool, and then flow. Yeah, didn't do that, because it just barely kind of hits this one, goes flying off that way, and goes down the other way. If you want it to pool and then flow, you've got to make sure that each element of the fountain has a cup. And then that cup has to overflow in the direction you want it to. Again, water only goes one way. So the all seems obvious when you're saying it, but when you're standing there with a pile of wet mud, it's not so obvious anymore. It's like, well, how am I going to do this? What am I doing with this thing? Now, when you're making a fountain, when can you test its water flow?
Probably
After you've glaze fired it. Because you can't get it wet before it's bisque. And if you get it wet when it's bisque, you gotta wait for it to dry again before you can glaze it, which you probably don't want to bother doing. And in the glaze fire, when you've got elements that are hanging all over the place, they tend to move a little bit. And which way do they move?
Down.
They move down, because gravity's funny that way. And if they move down, they might tilt a little bit, and they might no longer be where you put them. I've got some pictures we'll go through in just a little bit. So, how do you want it to be? Make sure you do it the way you want it to be. Make sure it's got enough strength so that it doesn't go bending on you when things happen. This puppy here is a prototype, believe it or not. How did it wind up being a prototype? Who puts that much work into a prototype? Well, because it wasn't supposed to be a prototype. It just didn't work quite right. And I'll put some water in there and show you some of the things that went wrong with it. But talking about movement, it twisted and came off of the join. This was joined before the glaze fire, and it just came apart because it felt like it.
Can you put silicone on?
Of course I could. Yeah, you you can do anything you want with these things, absolutely. I could take some epoxy, patch that together, and I can salvage the piece. But of course, the goal is to get it right, not to salvage it. So yes, you can absolutely fix things like that. And besides, on the back of the fountain, who cares anyway, right? Now, the trough at the top takes the water and then lets it down through the little holes, just like that one does. Can you tell that was the next try? This one, you'll notice, fills just about right and then drops through the holes just about right. That's because those holes are much, much smaller than these holes. How did I know to make them smaller? Because these were too big. This trough does not fill. This flows down. So much water comes through these holes that the whole thing is just splashing and making a big mess all over the place. So I filled up the holes. Can you fix it after them? Yeah, you can. I filled up the holes with Vaseline. Vaseline is your friend with water features because you can actually use the Vaseline to get the water to not go there, especially when you only have a little bit of water. So with that, I was able to make these holes a little bit smaller and make this one work so that I could actually get my prototype to work and get an idea of what I wanted to do. So I made these holes in this trough much, much smaller. So small, in fact, that they filled up with glaze. So I had to drill them out afterwards.
Yay, what fun.
Just in case you thought it was going to be easy to play with water. So all of that comes into play because you want these things to do stuff like that. You don't have to do holes. You could actually have it overflow over the top so that it would just flow over. That works great. In order to get it to flow over a surface or a range, what would it have to be? Absolutely perfectly level to the planet. And the planet's round, so it's impossible. So this one I got lucky here. This is actually just about full. But I did do the whole thing because the whole thing's a little bit easier because it's going to flow through. But flowing over is definitely a possibility. If you want, if you've ever been to one of these fountains that are in the town square or something, and you see it, this nice laminar flow across the entire fountain, that's hard. That's really hard to do. You got to get it perfect because water will show exactly the imperfections perfectly. So, yeah, go ahead.
These don't, do they?
They do. Just like these. There's one right there.
And that's,
And
it's
this
tiny.
one,
I
yeah,
didn't know
tiny, tiny little one. And then this one's got a tiny little one
I see.
that I actually put inside the thing.
Cool.
Ha ha ha! Get the hose to connect to it. Don't do that. It's really hard. I told you that was my first one, right? I made an outdoor fountain, a larger one. It's about this high. And it flows down over a series. It's got 2 leaves. I've got pictures of it. I'll show you the pictures. It's got 2 leads coming out of the pump, going up to 2 separate leaves, and then it flows down the leaves. And I think there's 11 or 13 elements that wind up in a big bowl that's on the bottom. And that one just flows from leaf to leaf. It doesn't have any holes in it. And this is a leaf from that fountain. And it's a lovely leaf, and it's got these 2 holes on the rib. Now, why did I put a rib on it? So that I've got something to attach to. Now, that piece is not entirely ceramic because it's a multi-format or multimedia. And what I did was I used the corner of a deck. Somebody hand me my iPad. It's on the table there. I used. Where did I put it? Here it is. And I'm just going to start thing. So, the water pumps up from the bottom, comes into the leaves. And the leaves for that particular fountain, I did all of the leaves come off of the point. So this leaf, this is actually a second fountain that I have not installed yet. It actually has a place for the water to go out the side. So this one will be dropping out the side instead of the front. Because if you think about, if it comes off of the tip, well, kind of, something went wrong. So this next one, first one's a prototype always. This one's going to pour off the side, and then maybe this way, and then maybe that one, and this one will be that way, and so forth. So that installation, as you look at the pictures going around, there's a piece of wood that actually screws to this, and then that wood becomes the branch, and the branch attaches to the deck post. And then by changing the angle of that attachment point, I can put this where it wants to go.
So you're going to have the wood showing on your piece.
The wood is showing. You'll see it. You'll see it as it goes around.
Paul, how tall can you get that water to go for something like this?
Discussion about pumps coming up shortly.
Okay.
You could get a pump that will pump water to the top of the Empire State Building. That's a big pump. Pumps are specifically rated for gallons per hour based on how high you're lifting the column of water. So if you're lifting the column of water 2 feet, that pump might give you 5 gallons per hour. That same pump a foot higher would be half a gallon per hour, and just a dribble and none, because it'll lift it only so far. And I've got a couple of pumps here I can show you in a minute. So when we're talking multimedia, we're now going to take a piece of wood and we're going to cut it at an angle so that it hangs just like so, and then it attaches at an angle just like so at the other one. Oh, that's a little wrong, so we'll disconnect it completely, take it down into the shop and sand it just a little bit so the angle is just a little bit different. And we do that for every single leaf. This is not fun.
It's research and development.
It's research and development, exactly. So, what are other alternatives? You could have the attachment point be adjustable so that you can just have the branch as an adjustment, and then you could just adjust it the way you want, tighten it up, and there it is. Of course, you'd need somebody to make those adjustable arms for you, or you could figure out how to engineer those.
Like the lamp arm.
Like a lamp arm or
Yeah,
something like
right,
that.
yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
But that you can have a changing installation.
We talked about gravity, we talked about level, we talked about where your water wants to go, down only. Flow of water. How much water is flowing and how fast is it flowing? This little pump is the size of the pump that I used for the outdoor one. This one will lift, it's not written on here, this one will lift some 20-30 gallons per hour, 6 feet high, which is great.
And how is that written when you're buying this?
It's a chart.
Okay.
It's a chart, and the way the chart is written is it'll be this pump at this height, this many gallons per hour.
And
So it's
does
a graph.
it take into consideration the diameter of the tube that you're running off of it?
The tube is a given because that's the size of this outlet of the hose. But yes, if you're going to put it through a smaller hose, that's going to pinch it down and therefore make the pump work harder and therefore less water at the top per hour. Yep.
There's not a little dial to
There,
it.
a little bit less, a little bit more, and if you've stuck your pump into the bottom of the thing underneath, good luck adjusting it. Yeah.
Where's the pump in this
Hold
one?
on, man out.
Where is the
Done.
pump
Wow.
in this one? The pump is submerged. All right, it's down in the vessel underneath, but that particular one I made a modesty panel that actually covers it up. That's not attached to the bowl because I had that problem before, and it's actually a piece of, it's a box essentially, a three-sided box. It's got openings on 3 sides, and it just fits in the vessel underneath. I didn't take pictures of it. There it
That's
is.
the box?
That's the box.
And so it's under there.
It's underneath there. Yeah. So of course it doesn't
Is that
seal, so the
separate?
water. Yeah, that's a separate piece. That
It's a
just,
separate piece.
it's a
that
modesty
goes on
panel,
top.
if you will.
And then the tubing goes
The tubing
up
goes
the back.
up. Yeah, it goes up the back. There's some tubing that you can see on the thing. You can't zoom in on it. It's a video.
Engineer, this is all
This
engineering.
one's fine.
Amazing.
Right. So when we talk about water features, the artistic part is one piece of the water feature that you're building. And it's an important piece. But the engineering of how the water is going to go, don't think it's just going to happen for you, because it's not. The water, it's completely unforgiving. And boy, the frustrations. Let me talk. Is actually about that high. It's got multiple elements that drool just right and land in the bowl just right. And I sold this one for over $500.
Yes. Good for you. Well
And I
deserved.
cried when I shipped it out because it came out so good. I wanted to keep it, but yeah, I let that one go. Does that look like it came out good?
It looks like you could recycle it.
That one, yeah, that one never made it to the bisque. That was, alright, so this was the piece before the disaster. And as you can see, it's got multiple elements. It looks just thing happening. You'll see that the top, it actually had, the centerpiece was straight up. None of this nonsense. And it just would bubble at the top and then fill the vessel at the top, which had a nice spout out of it, so that it would go exactly where I wanted to go into that first receptacle and had flow down. Well, it wasn't quite as stable as I wanted it to be, and I was letting it dry. I had finished it. I was letting it dry, and I came back the next day, and it had fallen over. Literally fell over and just crashed and burned. It was like,
Self-destruct.
and I cried. Oh, that was so heartbreaking. So, don't think that they're all going to work. They're not. So, here was a great idea. Let's have the water flow down a chain into a
water
little
chain.
bucket.
There you go.
That's a great idea. What does water do when it flows down a chain? It splashes all over the place. Do you want your fountain that's sitting on a table splashing all over the place? No. No. The answer is no. And if you look at the base of this one, so tell me whatever you want on that one. Needless to say, it didn't work. Yeah, what was I thinking? So, I had all kinds of crazy ideas. Well, the water, yeah, it's got laminar flow and it's got surface tension. It'll hug the outside of the spiral as it. Yeah, no. Didn't do any of those things. So as you're thinking as crazily as you want, because water flowing into circles and doing all kinds of things, how cool would that be? But the engineering of it is really hard, especially since you have to do it completely blind. You can't put any water into it until it's done, and it can't move at all once it's done. So, sort of a challenging thing. Where else was I going to go? All right, so go ahead.
I have a fountain that's just a small.
Take a bunch of teapots and put those teapots so that they fill into each other, and then do their little pour thing into each other, into a final receptacle at the bottom that pumps it up to the top. That's a perfect fountain. Would work great and seems so simple. And sure, that would be no problem at all. Have you ever made a teapot that pours
I would just
exactly perfectly where you expected it to pour when you pour it? Oh, that one's actually got some more pressure than I thought. And that one, it just sort of drips down the side. If we look at this element here, you'll notice that it doesn't actually drip. Surface tension in the water actually runs back this way and sort of drools back over there. Damn it! More water would make it work better. Why doesn't this one have more water? Because the hose is pinched. Smaller hose, less water flow. And no matter how much you tell that pump to crank it up, well, what that little thing to adjust your flow, what it's doing is it's allowing more or less water into the pump works. Well, we can talk about how pumps work, but that's not important here. But it's creating pressure, and that pressure is forcing the water up the column of the tube. If the column of the tube is pinched, it's got to generate more pressure to go past the pinch. If it's pinched enough, it's closed. And there's no water going through at all. Treated the problem. Did not work. What part of this one didn't work? There are all manner of things about this one that didn't work. One of the things that didn't work on this was that the water flow and the bubble from the top didn't go where it was supposed to be. This top ring here angled itself just a little bit because the whole thing sort of bent, so that the outpour 240, which I loved. It was like cream cheese. It was almost a porcelain, except that when you had elements like this, they tended to sag a lot more than I wanted them to. I wound up using 281, the white stoneware, 281. Seems to hold its shape pretty good. Still doesn't sometimes, depending on what you ask it to do, because it really depends on a lot of factors, as we have all found out the hard way. So, different size hoses. Thinner hoses, less water flow. Thicker hoses, more water flow. If you've got a backyard fountain that's this tall, you're going to want a bigger hose and bigger pump. Oh, where I was going before is if you turn it up so that you've got more water flowing, well, now you've got more pressure coming out of that hose. Well, if you have a hose with pressure, what happens? Well, you ever wash your car? You got a hose with pressure. Well, if you got a hose with pressure and it's hitting here, it's doing that. And that's not what you want either. So that's kind of problematic, right? So let me just take this guy. Somebody just fill up a bucket with water.
Does it make a difference
Up
how
on
much
top
water,
of the bucket.
or just enough to have with the pump?
Let's say, does it come with all the parts, or do you have to order like the hoses separately?
Like anything else in the world, it depends. However, in general, pumps are pumps, and they come
Like
like a pump.
Okay.
And in the pump, there'll be an adapter for various size hoses.
I think the ceramic supply, if you look in their catalog, in the back of their catalog, they have a thing for like clock parts. And
Yeah,
things
right,
like
Yep,
that. And
yep.
I think they also have pumps and things for these little water fountains.
Okay, so,
What about a fish tank store? Where would you go?
and where I have gone is I've gone to Amazon.com and looked for fountain pumps. And you will find all manner of them. Way too many, your head will explode. You're looking for ones that are quiet, submersible, low flow. And how much flow? It depends entirely on how much flow you want it to have. So, little bit of pressure coming in here. Notice that your drips are kind of visible because these holes weren't actually on the right next to the wall. So they're actually flowing out as a waterfall. That was not part of the plan. This one, it flows right down the wall. That was the plan for that one, because that one was the second one. You can see that the pressure of this water is actually hitting the side of the trough and flowing up and over because it wants to.
So Paul, if you wanted to have an actual fountain coming up, because the water is shooting up, you'd have to have a larger tray to catch all that water as it's spilling in,
Yes,
correct?
yeah, you're talking
Yeah.
about like a fountain.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly
you're going to
right.
want to
Yeah.
catch all that water. Now,
Got it.
notice what's happening here with my prototype. There's lots of water flowing. It's doing exactly what I wanted it to do, sort of, because it's kind of overflowing in a few different places. Notice that this one here drops the water this way, but I didn't have it full here.
Wait,
This, it's not going back that way because I didn't fill that in. There's a hole there. Well,
I see.
water will go. So this is now dripping. Now that it's dripping, where is it dripping? Notice it's dangerously close to that edge. That's only because of the Vaseline keeping it from going over here and just filling up the table. because I did not fill up that hole. Oops, my bad. Same thing, if I do this and I get it to fill properly instead of overflowing, now all of a sudden there's a bunch of water doing that.
Yeah.
That's kind of a
This
problem.
feels like-
That's not exactly what I wanted it to do. It's alright, I know where the mops are. I was cleaning up this
I know why
morning.
you're doing this demo.
Have you
Why is
To
done?
that?
make us all crazy. Because we're gonna try this and we're gonna.
Well, look,
Job
if
security.
I'm gonna be this insane, y'all can come with me, alright? So, boy, that all seemed so. Oh, I got it. Yeah, I got the thing, and okay, we don't want to do this because that does a lot of splashing, and this, and the trough, and the holes. Put them in the right sizes, and everything else, and try again, and try again, and again, and again, until you finally get something that succeeds. Now, this one, you notice I put little cuts in here so that it had a texture to flow down. Not enough. It needs to be deeper. So I'm still fine tuning. Can you put things on it for it to flow down and around it? The world is your oyster when you've got water flow, and it's cool. It makes a drippy sound, and it's really neat. And it will absolutely drive you crazy. Because it's hard. It's really hard. Questions?
Why Vaseline versus epoxy?
Vaseline you can put on and say, yep, a little bit more, a little bit, oh, that's too much, wipe it off again. Epoxy,
And how long does that last for you?
sometimes a day.
Oh,
What about silicone?
Next time you
caulking?
touch it,
Silicone caulking.
all totally valid. But silicone, Vaseline you can put on and test it right away. Any of these other things, put it on, that should work. Let it dry, and try it again. Oh, that didn't work. And now it's on there. It's epoxy. You're done. That's it. It's
Well,
over.
silicone caulking may.
Silicone, you could trim it back off again. Yeah, sure. Yes, you could. Your hoses to be visible. Probably not. You probably want to somehow figure out how the hose isn't visible. Say again? No. I thought someone had a question.
Thoughts to, you've got a ceramic basin of your own design.
I do.
Repurposing found metal basins,
Why not?
get you kind of there a little quicker.
Multimedia, absolutely. But
Pebble-
now, whatever you make has to stand so that you can put it into that base.
Flourish pebbles.
Or somehow got to stand up. Yeah. If you just make the wall itself,
Yeah, you need some kind
something's got to hold it up,
Yeah, yeah.
right? So in this case, it's bonded to the bottom and bonded to the strut, and the strut, of course, takes care of the hose and keeps it hidden.
Yep.
So that's all cool. You could take that element and put it into something else without the vessel. Yep, absolutely.
And most people are gonna wanna touch it, and they're gonna wanna put their fingers in the water, and so it has to be
And
stable.
it's got to be stable, because if it's not,
It's gotta be clean,
if
cause the
it's
kid
not,
is
yeah,
gonna,
there, and if they're gonna want to
Dog
touch
is
it,
gonna drink
the
out of it.
dog, my
and the dog's gonna want to drink out of it.
Right,
Yep,
right.
that's, all of these things have happened.
It'll drink all the water, and then the hose and the pump will burn out.
Maybe, water additives that you.
Oh, water additives. I can't speak to exactly what would work or what wouldn't work. Yes, they are certainly there, and you can start reducing the surface tension of the water, which is going to make it flow better. You can also start doing things with what's called laminar flow. So if you look at this, you can see how it drips nice and clean, and then it breaks up. If you increase the surface tension of the water, you can actually have it flow just like a rod, and it looks like a rod. And there are methods that you can research and figure out how to do such things. What I found for tabletop fountains, the key to this is dripping, or specifically the lack of sand. Because if it's dripping, one, it doesn't have a water source. The water's evaporating as it is. But if it's actually pumping it out, first of all, it's on your table and therefore on your floor. That's kind of a problem. And it eventually pumps dry. So these are bad things. So for me, what I've been trying to do is to avoid the splashing. More splashing, more splashing. So anything that's out,
Less
a
water.
fountain.
If
Yeah.
it's, is there anything you can put in it like vodka or something to keep it from getting bacteria in it?
Ah, so let's talk about, let's go there for a minute. Vodka, wow.
Your friends always wanna come over.
Cosmo in there.
I've got a vodka fountain in my man cave.
My
That's got merit. I like that.
The vodka idea is it would run dry so quickly around here.
It would definitely. All right, so if we look at,
Shaken, stirred, using a fountain.
let me just take this one over to the sink. We'll dump it. And if you look at it, it's all filled with buildup. What is that buildup? It's salt and minerals from the hard water in New Jersey. So, if you want to avoid that, you want to buy distilled water and fill your fountain with distilled water, because then it doesn't have minerals and hardness in it that can cause this kind of discoloration. And oh, by the way, cleaning it off, next to impossible. Have you ever tried to clean the lime off of your sinks? It's not easy to do, and on something like that, I actually have cleaned that, and it doesn't come off.
There's a stone you can buy in Home Depot that's like a pumice kind of
Yep.
stone. You buy it in the cleaning aisle.
The decent success with cleaning it, but that hard water is bare. It is bad, and it shows up on,